Can everyone please take their seat? If you can also put your mobile phones on silent, that would be highly appreciated. Thank you. Okay. Dear President of the Cyprus Institute, dear Minister Mrs. Pilidis and Dr. Kozakou Markoulis, dear Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this plenary session during which we will discuss the summary of the pre-conference workshops. And I would like now to call to the stage for the welcoming message the chair of the organizing committee, founding member of the Cyprus Academy of Science, Letters and Arts, and President Emeritus of the Cyprus Institute, Professor Kostas Papanikolas.
Good afternoon. Welcome to this concluding phase of the pre-conference workshops, which actually this session is meant to act as a bridge between the pre-conference meetings and the conference that officially opens tomorrow at this same room. So in the middle of an intensifying war, horrible times, raging in our region, it is a sign of hope that scientists and policymakers have gathered for this conference and have worked in these pre-conference workshops to discuss and hopefully plan and implement a sustainable future with emphasis on transboundary actions. To discuss how to beat the common enemy, the climate crisis. This is already, I believe, a major achievement of this conference before we even start. As you can see in the room, starting tomorrow, we are over the capacity of the room. It's oversubscribed. We had to turn people away in these very difficult times. And the latest statistics, we have 22 nationalities present at the conference, and I believe over 250 registered. The room cannot fit them, so we did a little bit of overbooking. So we, the organizers, the Cyprus Academy of Science, the Letters and the Arts, and the Cyprus Institute are proud to host this forward-looking conference addressing arguably the biggest threat to humanity and, of course, to our region, and which will manifest the climate crisis in a most extreme way, as the modelers predict, in the Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East region. It is in the mission and the vision of both organizations, as Professor Malas, I'm sure, will highlight tomorrow, that the Cyprus Academy and the Cyprus Institute, and actually Cyprus itself, being the easternmost member of the European Union and the only member of the European Union in the Middle East, to facilitate, and we did indeed facilitate a number of workshops, not only today, to promote the science, the technology, the letters and the arts for the well-being of the peoples of the area, and to promote peace and prosperity for our common, hopefully peaceful, sustainable future. We had several workshops, as you know, most of you here, or all of you attended one or more, and collaboration meetings of specific projects during the last 2 days. And in collaboration with organizers of these workshops, we asked those that thought that it would be proper and appropriate to present their findings and conclusions, because they are of broader interest, not all of them are, to present them in a plenary session. So this resulted in these two workshops, two sessions that will follow. Finally, I would like to thank the two most prominent in regional and European, even global terms, leaders that will be chairing these two workshops. Ex-ministers Kozakou Markouli and Natasha Pilidou. Both are staunch leaders and supporters of these initiatives and the vision outlined. And I would like to thank them for finding the time to do that. And the fact that they are both women, I think, speaks volume. Another indication that this meeting is about the future. Excellencies, colleagues, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Papanikolas. Before we proceed, I'll give a brief introduction of both of our honorable chairs. I will start with Mrs. Natasha Pilidis. Mrs. Pilidis is a distinguished Cypriot politician and former Minister of Energy, Commerce and Industry. During her tenure, she championed green energy initiatives and boosted entrepreneurship. She also led funding programs for business competitiveness and spearheaded the approval of 658 million by the EU for the construction of an electricity interconnection between Israel, Cyprus, and Greece. Ms. Pilidis forged and fostered strong relationships with EU and Middle Eastern counterparts, chaired the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum, and oversaw oil and gas operations in Cyprus, amongst other achievements. She has previously served as Cyprus' first shipping deputy minister, promoting the country's maritime sector, and she has also served as a Director General of Invest Cyprus, driving investment promotion and reform. Her private sector experience includes senior roles at Baker Tilly and PwC. Ms. Pilidis is a member of the Board of Directors of the Cyprus Institute and member of the Cyprus Research and Educational Foundation. Ms. Pilidis holds a first-class degree from Oxford University in Modern Languages, and she's a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales, and a member of the Certified Public Accountants of Cyprus. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Ms. Natasha Pilidis on stage to start our first session.
Hello, everyone, and Excellencies, thank you so much. Dr. Papanikolas, thank you so much for your very kind introduction. And Eleni, I thought you were speaking about someone else because it was extremely flattering. It's such an honor to be here today, and congratulations on the excellent work of the Institute. I'm very proud to be a part of it now and hope to contribute positively. And congratulations to everyone who has been involved in all the workshops, all the work that has gone into preparing for this conference, which I am sure is going to be extremely useful, not just to our region, but beyond the Eastern Mediterranean region as well. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the very important scientists that we have here with us today for the first session, to tackle some very interesting topics which are particularly critical for our region and for Cyprus specifically. Dr. Nestor Phylaktos, who will be covering the role of energy storage for decarbonizing the Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East. Dr. Phylaktos is a research scientist at the Cyprus Institute. He holds a PhD from Imperial College London on mathematical modeling of socioeconomic impacts of renewable energy in isolated communities, and he has very wide experience in research in matters that are very important to Cyprus, such as these matters concerning isolated communities, green energy, including hydrogen, the environmental implications of hydrocarbons exploration, all matters that are of great interest to us in the region and beyond. And he has worked extensively with energy stakeholders in Cyprus, civil society, government, industry, academia, to bring forward solutions. And we very much look forward to hearing more about those solutions. So shall we welcome Dr. Nestor to the stage? And then we have Professor Jos Lelyveld. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Apologies for the error, if there's an error, who will be covering the issue of climate health in the urban environment, and who also holds a PhD in physics from the University of Utrecht, and is a research associate at Goizens in Rotterdam, or was, and very impressive research and a wealth of experience as well, which we look forward to hearing about. Then we have Professor Panos Hadjinicolaou, who's also an associate professor at the Cyprus Institute, who will be speaking to us about urban overheating in the MENA region, prospects and challenges. Dr. Hadjinicolaou is an associate professor, as we said, at the Climate and Atmosphere Research Center, CARE-C, of the Cyprus Institute. Welcome. And more than 15 years ago, he established regional climate modeling research in Cyprus. Currently, he's leading the urban climate modeling efforts of the Institute. And thank you very much for being here and all your contribution. And our final two, last but not least, contributors, Nicholas Bakirtsis, who will be covering the impacts of climate change on cultural heritage, together with Anthi Galdelli. And a few words about Mr. Bakirtsis. He's an associate professor and a director at the Andreas Bitas Art Characterization Laboratories, and program coordinator at with a PhD in science and technology and archaeology and cultural heritage, and has received his PhD from Princeton University, held postdoctoral and visiting faculty positions at Columbia University in New York, at Koç University in Turkey, and at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis. His awards and fellowships include support from the European Commission, the Cyprus Research and Innovation Foundation, the Princeton Seeger Center for Hellenic Studies, the Levendis Foundation, and many more. His research focuses on the art and archaeology of the medieval and early modern Mediterranean, and he's particularly interested in issues of cultural heritage in historic Mediterranean cities. At Cyprus Institute, as we mentioned, he's director of the Andreas Bitas Art Characterization Labs, and doing research on the materiality and the provenance of works of art enhanced through the use of advanced digital and analytical methods. He also led the task force on the cultural heritage of the Cyprus-led Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East Climate Change Initiative. And Dr. Anthi Galdelli holds a PhD in archaeology from the Institute of Archaeology, UCL, of course. As an archaeological officer at the Department of Antiquities, she's actively involved in the UNESCO and EU projects and has coordinated management studies for the World Heritage Sites of Nea Paphos in collaboration with the Getty Conservation Institute and the Painted Churches in the Troodos region. Dr. Galdelli is a member of the ICROM Council and has been representing the Republic of Cyprus in ICROM General Assemblies and the World Heritage Committee sessions and assemblies. Dr. Galdelli was part of the EU's expert group on strengthening cultural heritage resilience for climate change. She's a focal point for the joint initiative of the Hellenic Republic and for the UN for addressing climate change impacts on cultural and natural heritage. So without further ado, thank you again, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. And we welcome to the stage Dr. Nestoros Phylaktos. Would you like to stand, or yeah, to present the role of energy storage for decarbonizing the Eastern Mediterranean? Thank you.
Hello. So we had a workshop today. there was a workshop today at the Cyprus Institute that involved a lot of academics, researchers, policymakers, the industry, and professional associations on the general stakeholder area of energy. It was actually very well attended. We had about 50 to 55 people that came along. There was a lot of discussions about the role of energy storage, electricity storage, but also storage in other mediums, for the energy transition of Cyprus and also of the region. First of all, let me start with saying that energy storage is definitely one of the main tools for flexibility of energy systems. By flexibility, I mean the ability to use renewable energy sources and put them into the system, and basically taking everything to the next day when we are going to get rid of fossil fuels. The situation in Cyprus and in Greece and many countries of the region is that we have a lot of curtailment now of renewables. By curtailment, I mean that there's a lot of production of renewable energy that is not used. There has been a lot of changes in the last few years in the introduction of renewables, especially photovoltaics. For example, in Cyprus, we went from about 50 megawatts about 6-7 years ago to more than 700 megawatts installed capacity right now. And this means that in periods where we have a lot of generation but low demand, a lot of that energy is not used. The transmission system operator has to curtail it. So energy storage is the main tool that we have in order to take that energy, put that away, and reuse it when we need it. There are many reasons to do that and many tools to use, but there's a broad agreement to that. The main technology that has emerged for grid-scale storage is obviously batteries. And right now, we are witnessing a situation where costs are very low, mostly because of oversupply in China. And this creates opportunities and challenges for the rest of the world. This has been taken up by the private sector, where new electricity markets now are trying to introduce storage, and the region is trying to adapt its business model into something that would allow the private sector to enter that. And the private sector thinks that it's beneficial for them to have a healthy return for their investment, which is now not clear if it's the case, but this is the direction where things are going. But the prevalence of batteries in energy systems for the next few years is going to be a thing similar to what we have seen with photovoltaics. Photovoltaics were very expensive in the past. They have become very cheap, and they have become basically commoditized, and now they're pretty much everywhere. And the trend in energy markets of the area is basically to treat batteries in more or less the same way. The workshop, however, also highlighted a few more issues, that batteries themselves are not the only and should not be the only tool that we have at our disposal for the energy transition. Apart from the other alternative reasons why, the main technical difficulty that we have with batteries is that they cannot provide the sort of quality that the grid requires in order to operate, especially when we go towards net zero targets, when we get closer to reducing emissions to very, very low levels. And that has to do with inertia, that has to do with reserves, but also has to do with the local value that the batteries have, which is actually very low. They tend to become just commodities, just appliances that we buy from abroad. We install them in our systems with very, very minimal technology transfer. And also, there is very, very small coupling with other sectors, industrial sectors, fuels for transportation, etc. And there is an opportunity there for other storage technologies to provide those services. And for the most part, this seems to be an area where thermal energy storage and compressed energy storage can also become a factor. We have done some modeling to show basically that introducing those technologies reduces the cost and increases the resilience of the system itself. And we are going to be seeing a future where we will be decarbonizing our energy systems using storage as one of the main tools, but not only batteries. This was one of the main conclusions that we got from the workshop. Now, there has been also talk internationally, but also in the region, about the role of other energy carriers like hydrogen. You must have heard that. It's very fashionable in the last few years. It turns out that for countries that do not have a very large industrial base, hydrogen only makes sense if there's a very strong coupling with other sectors. And when I say strong coupling, it means that we have to have solutions that hydrogen we have to have questions that hydrogen can answer, which can include the maritime sector, when we'll talk about fuel for ships, or the transportation sector, when we talk about heavy trucks, either lorries or trucks. If this is not the case, then using hydrogen itself on its own, just for electricity storage for electricity grids, is not a very economical solution or the one that makes sense. It makes more sense basically to just use electricity itself and store it in other means. It was also highlighted that regional cooperation is critical, mostly because we are now replacing a system of reliance on hydrocarbons with one that we're going to be relying on raw materials from specific locations around the world that are only able to provide them. And countries have to team up in order to tackle that issue, because it's a serious technical and geopolitical challenge. The cooperation is paramount in solving something like this. There was also discussion about extending the current model that we have of centralized generation, baseload generation, like fossil fuel plants that we already have, but replacing that with something which is carbon-free or almost carbon-free, like nuclear energy. This has challenges of its own. There were some proponents of that for some countries of the region, but most policymakers are very reluctant, at least of Cyprus and Greece and the countries that were present at the workshop this morning, to consider that as a viable alternative for many technical and economic reasons. What emerged, however, is that if we have a stable supply of electricity which is carbon-free of very low carbon intensity, what would be beneficial is to have interconnections between those countries where they would be able to take advantage of a larger network of low carbon electricity supply. This is not the case right now. It could be the case for the future, and this is something that we should be emphasizing on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. It's a very interesting analysis, and I think we'll come back to some of the issues if we have time on what we can do given the risks that you've presented with batteries and the limitations of other solutions. So moving on then to our second workshop for your initial intervention, please, Professor Leliva, and yes. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we had a fantastic workshop, fewer people than you, about 25. But it was a very interdisciplinary company, and this is also needed. I mean, I'm not a health specialist, and I'm reporting on this, so this is an example of the interdisciplinarity needed here. And many new results were presented, really fascinating work. And also we had the plan to report this in the literature, and we asked 3 young scientists to take notes and report, and actually I'm using their notes to inform you about what we were discussing. We try to also take the approach from the, say, stakeholder side, so scientist, stakeholder, and this also helped us to find some things that we really need to focus on. Now, the general picture is that, this is a hotspot of climate change, and there can be critical health impacts associated with them in this region. There's some emphasis on the urban environment, and I just want to give you one number. If we take the Middle East and North Africa together, we have about 2/3 of the population, which is of the order of 900 million, living in cities. And the demographic projections tell us that the population will grow, say, the second half of this century up to about 1.5 billion, where 80 to 90% of the population will be living in cities. So cities are really the focus of also the health impact studies. So we had 3 parts. One was on temperature extremes, one was on vector-borne diseases, and one was on air pollution. Now, what came also about, I mean, this is actually true for all the health studies. There is not one single cause and one single outcome. Many aspects play a role in health. And this is something that the stakeholders also want from us, a clear attribution of causes and outcomes. And one of the things that's very relevant in this context is, for example, the urban heat island effect. It's not climate change, but it can be very important, and especially in an urbanizing environment. So we need to make this distinction. And this is also providing opportunities for urban design, for example. There are many things I think we will hear also from you, things like urban greening, cool roofing, and improving heat-resilient infrastructure at the city level. So this will be critical also for improving health. There were presentations that also emphasized nighttime. So we are often looking at, when we look at the weather forecast, we look at the daytime maximum temperature. I mean, I remember in June here we had 46 degrees, which was horrendous. But it's not only during the day, it's also during the night. It's the metabolism of the body that actually needs cooler nights to cool down and prevent health impacts. So there was quite a lot of emphasis also on increasing nighttime temperatures and nighttime heat stress, and also a need for better metrics on evaluating these things. So we, for example, find that maximum temperature alone is not helpful. We need the daily evolution of the temperature to estimate metrics for health impacts. Okay, let me go vector-borne diseases. Also here there is a complex interplay between drivers, including of course global temperature change, and the spreading of vector-borne diseases. And now there was some emphasis on Aedes mosquitoes. These are Aedes albopictus and Aedes aegypti, which are mosquitoes that spread dengue, Zika, and chikungunya. It's clearly these mosquitoes have also arrived in Cyprus in the last years, so this is something that is also extremely relevant for Cyprus. Also here it's important to make a distinction to what is actually related to climate change and other causes. And I also want to mention in this context that this work actually at the Cyprus Institute started approximately a decade ago, actually a bit before that. In 2012 we organized workshops, George, Christofides and we, and we did some predictions, and we predicted that Aedes albopictus, the tiger mosquito, will invade larger parts of Europe, but also North America. And the areas that we then indicated are exactly those areas where these mosquitoes are now invading. I think this is a big success for the Cyprus Institute to take up something like this, interdisciplinary, very specific, but also very helpful in terms of predictions. There was also quite some discussion on interventions. I mean, we need to be practical. We need to also develop. We talk a lot about early warning systems, but what's actually needed is decision support tools, probably more important. And this includes, in this case, insecticides, very precise, because different types of insects need different. So here also the communication between the scientist and actually data collection and designing these interventions was very important. You can have mosquito traps, toxic sugar baits, but also genetic control techniques. Now there's some ethical issues with these techniques that need to be overcome, but they have a high potential of being helpful. They're being tested now for malaria. Let me go to the last section. Apologies for not addressing all the points that our students have been listing. This is on air quality. Also here, there is a clear connection between climate change and air quality in terms of emissions, causing climate change, causing poor air quality, but also the urban environment, urban heat domes that sort of trap the pollution. And what we also find is that this is also an area of active research in the Cyprus Institute, that our group has always been at the high end of the predictions. And recent estimates actually moved up very closely to these high-end predictions. We were able to explain why some of the predictions we did were higher, but this is now really converging. So this is also an important message for policymakers, that the community is getting its act together. Then there was also quite a lot of discussion, because what is being regulated is fine particulate matter. These are particulates that have a diameter smaller than 2.5 micrometer. This is the legal framework in which we operate, but there is a lot of evidence that actually subsections are more toxic, so specific size categories within these fine particles, and also chemical categories that need to be addressed. And there was a lot of progress being presented here. Okay, I think I probably used up more than my 5 minutes, so I'll stop here. And
thank you very much. No, that's actually very interesting, and perhaps we can explore some of the issues a bit further later on. Now, Professor Hadjinicolaou has also some interesting interventions on urban overheating, so not the health aspect, but perhaps some other interesting aspects. So over to you.
Yes,
Professor.
thank you. Actually, our workshop had covered a few things that were common, and maybe in the future could put these two communities, let's say, or workshops together. And actually, it was attended by fewer people than the previous one, so it goes by diminishing order. But it was very interesting and very, I think, vivid. It was also, we have participants from Greece, because a large part of the scientific progress that was reported was part of the Climate project, which is now the biggest, the most important climate change project in Greece. So had the colleagues from Greece attending and contributing. So urban overheating. We started by giving a brief account from the global to the local. We know that the last 13 months we are breaking records globally in the global average temperature. We also know, and it's established, we measure it, that our region is warming faster than the global average, and that also nationally or locally we keep having record extremes like the June that we all experience, not only in Cyprus but in the region. And the other thing about urban overheating is it has main two components of interest. It is established, and Jos Lely will talk about the urban heat island, that cities are warmer than the surrounding because of the material and the different exchanges between the surface and the atmosphere. So this urban overheating, it means more heat stress for the inhabitants in the cities, but because of this, more energy consumption to cool the inhabitants of the cities. So these are two, let's say, key elements that it was evident from our scientific reporting and the different works that we went through that they were actually of interest. Now, climate models are the main tools not only for projecting the global warming or understanding the global warming, but also by downscaling methods, dynamical or statistical, to go down to the local level of a few 1 kilometer or less. So our workshop actually was a bit biased on the physical aspects of heat in the cities, including modeling and data analysis efforts. Overall, there has been a progress internationally, but also by the groups that they participated in applying climate models at the scale of 1 kilometer at the city level. And this allows us not only to understand and project the climate, for example, air temperature within the city, but the models now have capabilities of including other calculations, for example, assessing or estimating the heat comfort. There are indices for this. Or, and most importantly for adaptation, including in the models scenario of different interventions to cool down the cities. For example, by adding trees in the cities, urban trees as we call it, or greening the surfaces, the roofs of the buildings, green roofs, but also calculating the energy consumption by the increase in the air conditioning. So now, and I want to close this part, I want to report that there is a progress in the modeling of all these aspects, not only of climate, but potential adaptations in the city. I will not go into detail to report specific studies, but we had studies regarding regional assessments of several cities in the Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East at lower resolution, with not so much, with simpler approaches for the urban physics. But we also had, and we have studies for specific cities with more elaborated approaches and representations of the urban physics. That allows us to have also an intra-urban view of the climate and the challenges. So one thing that emerged is the so-called urban inequality, and that doesn't mean only that different parts of one city may be of different income, so they react differently to the impacts of warming, but also because of the physics. Cities, different parts of the cities are different. They respond different to the urban heat island effect. And finally, in terms of reporting, two more things. We had also studies that relate the regional atmospheric conditions to the local atmospheric conditions and to the influence within a city. For example, the case of Athens, where we saw the influence of the Etesian winds in a heat wave in Athens, but also the ameliorating effect of the sea breeze at the south suburbs of Athens, so which must be taken into account. And lastly, we had a contribution not from the climate modeling of the cities, but actually from things that happen in the building. So we went down to the building level. So we consider, for example, the effect of adding new materials to the building blocks of our edifices, and they make a difference in not only the carbon footprint, but also in the environmental conditions inside and outside the building. So overall, several of these aspects, and maybe when I talk in the second time I can add something more, they will also assist a very interesting session later in the main conference about the built environment that the co-organizer of this workshop, Professor Skartalis, will chair, I think, in the next couple of days.
Thank you, Professor. It's very sad, actually, and worrying that the more the heat stress within the cities, the more the consumption, and we seem to be in a vicious circle of overconsumption. And very interesting that you have some practical solutions as well that can actually counteract that. So yes, it will be very interesting to hear more about it later on. And now moving on to the very important issue of cultural heritage, which is perhaps not the first thing that comes to mind with climate change, but a very important aspect, and very interested in finding out more about the workshop outcomes.
Thank you. Well, Anthi and myself organized a workshop this morning at the Cyprus Institute, and we will try to offer a brief report of what was discussed. it was quite very interesting and engaging, but I can report that we had to make a common disclaimer at the beginning with all our participants and contributors that none of us came to the table as a climate change expert. We needed to begin with that, to unlock people's kind of willingness to share their concern about it, because we engaged people that came from the humanities, archaeology, history, folklore, but also we had chemists, conservation scientists, architecture, and also urban planners. So we came to the table as cultural heritage stakeholders, and we tried to essentially address the way that our work relates to what is happening and what we've been experiencing. We heard reports from European and international projects. We had very focused studies on how materials and downscaling research can really improve the way that we deal and we prepare cultural heritage monuments as sites and our experience in them. We heard even personal accounts from last summer, which was a very, very engaging kind of meeting. So, of course, we began with Anthi with offering a background to the group. So, of course, we started with some of these stark statements, like the one of UNESCO that has identified our region, the Middle East and the Eastern Mediterranean, as ground zero for climate change and its impact on our heritage. And of course, we also had to mention again and set the stage by referring to the ways that the IPCC has identified that a lot of these impacts will be long-lasting, or better, we can say irreversible, especially when it comes to the examples of monuments and sites directly affected by climate impacts as they are exposed to certain conditions and phenomena. So, of course, we had to go back to the results of the task force and what we discussed in the Cyprus, Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East Climate Change Initiative. And we tried to begin the discussion with three key inquiries, which was, the first one was about the extent or the degree of impacts of climate change on the regions and Cyprus's cultural heritage, both tangible and intangible, the way that climate change on cultural heritage affects social and economic life, and then transitioning from that, the third inquiry that we tried to discuss was the role of climate change and how it can really weave into the region's climate change transition. So, Afi?
Yes, Nicolas has given the introduction on what we did today. What I wanted to emphasize is the need to start any discussion on cultural heritage by recognizing its role, its significance, because cultural heritage can contribute in addressing the impacts of climate change in general, in providing solutions. For example, through preserving traditional knowledge on traditional building techniques and methods, or through preserving historical buildings, which are energy efficient. And also, it does contribute immensely in securing growth. And once we the way we approach the management of cultural heritage is based on the sustainable development goals of UNESCO, of the UN. So we need to bear that in mind, because despite its significance, cultural heritage and the dangers it suffers because of the climate crisis have been more or less ignored until very recently. So at the workshop, we began the workshop by actually setting the framework, as Nicolas has already said, which was very important to talk about the the task force on cultural heritage, because Cyprus, through the initiative, is one of the first countries which actually included heritage in a policy, in a state policy. The threats posed by climate change have been assessed as part of a high-level working group of the European Union, an open method coordination group. It examined ways to strengthen resilience, because this is what we have to do concerning heritage. We need to strengthen resilience against the impacts of climate change. This was the result of the recognition that cultural heritage was in fact absent from the European Green Deal. This working group began in 2019 and it finished in 2022. We worked throughout COVID, throughout the pandemic, but we did work closely. We did identify gaps, the needs and the measures that need to be taken, and when we talk about gaps, we talk about the absence of collaboration between stakeholders, between ministries, between researchers. This was obvious for all member states to one extent or the other. But this group kind of forced things to happen on a higher level. And it is all these heritage voices that led to this, to the historic inaugural meeting, which happened last December in Dubai at COP28, where cultural heritage was included in the climate agenda. And our deputy minister also had participated. And at that meeting, the group of Friends of Culture-Based Climate Action was established, led by Europa Nostra, which is also very important. And talking about such meetings, it's also worth noting that last week there was the meeting of the ministers of the G7 in Naples, and again, climate change was discussed concerning heritage. Now, there are different frameworks and policies by UNESCO, by ICOMOS, by ICROM. It's this policy document for an action plan on climate action, rather, on World Heritage Sites. And what is being underlined is the need for mitigation measures, adaptation measures, the importance of local communities, the importance of conducting risk assessments, and in general, the need to act, because heritage is very, very important. We need to preserve it as it is our identity, and we need to focus on monitoring, on documentation, and on interdisciplinary approaches, and it is what we try to do today. We had researchers from different areas, as Nicolas has underlined, and we did emphasize research that is emphasize the need to have research concerning the space-based remote sensing technologies and satellite images to look at the vulnerability of sites and monuments and predict risks, which is something very important, and we can do that locally with our research institutes. We talked about digital documentation, about the need to use downscaling approaches to preservation of heritage. And of course, we did emphasize the need to raise awareness, build more on education. Us, as heritage practitioners, we have to be educated as well. And awareness raising has to be, we have to work on all levels. And it's important to focus on values and on the values of heritage, on the need to preserve them, and on participatory approaches. And when we work with producing risk assessments, local communities need to be included, because when we talk about heritage, we talk about everything. It's the tangible and intangible heritage as well. So it is us, the people, the communities, that need to realize the need to preserve their environment and their traditions.
Absolutely, and I think nobody would disagree with that. It's a matter that perhaps we don't think about enough, but we certainly understand how critical it is to start thinking about it. And indeed, perhaps there's a gap in that there's a skill set lacking in climate experts who are specifically concerned with this issue of cultural heritage. As you mentioned, you bring your expertise to the table, but it's not tailored to this exact risk. So going back to Dr. Phylaktos, with Great Sea Interconnector, there's been a lot of talk about whether Cyprus, for example, being an island, an isolated system, could just develop autonomy with batteries, and that would be a lot cheaper and perhaps more sustainable solution. However, you mentioned a lot of risks relating to batteries, and I think everyone would be interested in finding out more about that. And what practically are some alternative solutions? You did delve into some and the concerns that there are around them also. But in your view, what would perhaps work?
Okay, thanks for the question. You're actually touching on a very sensitive political issue now, which is now all over the news.
From the scientific perspective, though, forgetting the interconnector,
No, but these are interrelated topics, and to be honest, in the workshop we tried not to go into that direction very much, because these are interlinked but separate issues. And the prevalence of energy storage could happen independently of what happens with interconnection. Even though long-term, the interconnection will bring the benefits that we see in other countries interconnections have. But this is in the medium term, so we focused on storage only. Now, there's one thing that actually Panos mentioned, and Jos, about the increased energy demand due to the weather conditions and people basically trying to cool themselves down during the night. And of course, that happens during the summer. So this exacerbates an issue that we already identified, and it's a common characteristic of the countries of the area, which is that we have a large variability between the demand in high demand seasons, like the summer. Basically, the summer here is the peak, and valleys, which usually happen in spring and autumn. We're talking about a difference of about 5 times between the demand of those two. That raises an issue, the question whether we should be relying on something which is only short-term and only addressing the needs of the diurnals, well, the daily, basically, cycle. And maybe we should concentrate on bridging that gap, the seasonal energy storage, where we have very high production for renewables during those low seasons, spring and autumn. Why don't we use that, or some of it anyway, in the high peak seasons? Now, this is an area that batteries are not really very well suited to do, because they are expensive when they are trying to cover, when they have a large capacity. Storage is power and energy. Power is how fast a system can actually inject energy into a system, and the other part is how big it is. Like think of it as kind of a water tank. Because of their cost, they're not really suited for this. And so we're looking at solutions which can provide energy storage for more than 6 hours. That's the usual technical term of the long-term energy storage, long-duration energy storage. And there, the solutions are many, but many of them are at the kind of low TRL stage. Some of them have matured to become commercial, but the cost is not very favorable to them when we're talking about short-term. But for the long-term, thermal energy storage is one prime candidate. Compressed air is another. And perhaps liquid carriers as hydrogen or solar fuels, which were also discussed during the workshop this morning. These can play that role, because they can be built up in cheaper than batteries, hold energy that can be actually delivered back to the system when the demand is higher. Apart from that, batteries also have the issues that I mentioned before, with the material, the supply chain requirements, the raw materials, but also the mining conditions that you see for certain types of batteries all around the world. Of course, a disclaimer here, whatever happens with batteries, even if they become they're going probably to become the dominant source of form of storage for now and for the medium-term future, their environmental impact is minimum compared to what we have now with the extraction of fossil fuels, their use, and the contribution to climate change. So we shouldn't be very critical of it. It's just that in comparison with other technologies, yes, they have some drawbacks that we should be mindful of and highlight. And they are not the best solution for every application.
Of course, but indeed it's all relative, so we should keep that in mind. I don't think we'll have time to go around the third time because we're already running out of time, so can I ask you to offer a concluding remark now and then we'll move on to Joss?
Well, as a concluding remark, I'd say that the market conditions should mature fast enough in order to bring in the private sector as fast as possible. Because right now we're in a situation where we rely too much on state interventions to install grid power, grid battery solutions, and this is not a sustainable approach. We need to have investors who, of course, are environmentally minded, but also looking at a return. And this has to be incentivized now in order to create the necessary critical mass for this to take off. And also, we shouldn't be oblivious to the fact that behind the meter energy storage, when I say behind the meter, I mean small systems that are installed at homes, can play a very, very important role. And we don't give that enough credence for the time being. They don't provide grid services like the bigger systems do, but they do smooth out demand, and they also make consumers much more mindful of how they behave, because they can see the numbers, basically, and reduce change their behavior. It's a very powerful tool for behavioral change. That's my concluding remarks.
Very interesting. Actually, the ministry was planning both behind-the-meter funding solution and a, what do you call it in English?
Grid-scale battery.
Yeah. Yes, in front of the meter, I know, but it would be interesting to see where that is. So, Dr. Lelyveld, could you offer some more practical advice? Then you mentioned a lot about how there's no one conclusion from all the impacts that you possibly see on health. But what is it most important that we do from now on? Seeing as in the MENA region as well, we're not that great at urban planning ahead of time.
Yeah, well, the bottom line is we should phase out fossil fuels. That's my message. And of course, this cannot be done immediately. And my colleagues are working hard on this to make it happen also in Cyprus. A bottom line message in our discussions was also that we need to bring together scientists and policymakers, because scientists often have solutions for problems that stakeholders do not have, and stakeholders often need solutions for problems that scientists cannot resolve. So we need to bring that together and see if we can find some practical ways in dealing with this. It's also, when you talk about health, it's really important to consider the many different aspects that are related to poor health. I mentioned urbanization, but another another issue is that aging. The population is aging, and we are talking about vector-borne diseases, so these are clearly attributable to mosquitoes, but we also have the thermal heat stress, etc., that affect people with chronic diseases. Also, air pollution causes chronic diseases from long-term exposure. So, in order to come to solutions there, one needs to make distinction between these different. And also, actually, if you talk about vector-borne diseases, there are really a lot of interventions that are already available. And there was also discussion on sometimes interventions are being used that don't work, even though interventions are available that do work. So evidently there is some work to do for our community there. Then there's a need for regulatory harmonization. So there's a lot of regulations, there is a lot of guidelines, and countries often do things, and the EU does other things. And of course the Middle East and North Africa is not EU, so try to see if we can get to some sort of harmonization and provide technical guidelines for applying interventions, for example. Did I answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's so much information in there. We could be talking about each of the separate topics the whole day. Unfortunately, we only have a limited amount of time. But thank you very much for that. And Professor Hadjinicolaou, you mentioned a little bit already in your first intervention that there are a lot of challenges to understanding urban overheating. how do we overcome them and how do we adapt to urban overheating?
Well, a main constant challenge is that no city is the same. So although our models apply the same physical laws to calculate the interaction between the surface and the atmosphere in the cities, there is a challenge in the input data of urban properties, morphology, building height, building density, and other aspects that are used in the models. So there is a challenge of having data, but also at high spatial resolution. We also need observational data to validate our models within the city. Normally, the national meteorological networks, they have one station per city, but now there is a big challenge for creation of urban meteorological networks. So this is one question. And the last one related to adaptation. As I said before, our models are now mature enough in order to have results and offer, let's say, scenario and solutions for adaptation. But this needs to be communicated now to the stakeholders. For example, Kostas Kartalis had a nice exchange with Dr. Martili about the tall buildings. Okay, so the skyscrapers or very high buildings and their effects. At the street level, the tall building will lower the temperature during the day because of the shading, but during the night, because of the radiative trapping, the temperature will be higher at the street level, and kind of the opposite is on the top of the building. So, as also Professor Mayer emphasized, it's a question also of, we spend most of our times in the city inside the buildings, which I've never realized actually, but I think it's true. So now the models are mature enough to start offering some solutions, but there is a need for starting having communication among the research, the government, especially the local government, to start now dealing, because there can be interventions and solutions according to our models, but we need to start communicating them and thinking how to implement them.
As ever, planning is not something we always excel at, but hopefully we can do a better job given the threats that we have in front of us. And indeed, that's what I wanted to ask about cultural heritage. You mentioned so many of the challenges that we have ahead of us in overcoming all the problems that you see ahead. If you had to name a top priority that we have to do, that we have to put first now to do in order to start tackling these problems, what would that be?
Okay, I think it's good. This is a perfect, I would say, even kind of concluding. No? Okay, thank you. So I will answer by just sharing with you what we did in the workshop at the end. We kind of asked participants to share a series of their most important, let's say, keyword and their most important priority. So we grouped them in effectively 4 kind of areas, and I will share this with you, and this is, I think, the most suitable answer at this point. So one was interdisciplinarity, collaboration, and synergies. So we felt that this was quite successful in our effort to, let's say, bring people with different backgrounds around the table and to agree that there is a lot to learn and to gain by beginning to speak, let's say, a shared scientific, at least, language. A second area was, that came up a lot, awareness, communication, public and community engagement. This was raised by several of our participants and the public, that this is something that they feel that in general communities at the community level are not still very much aware of what is happening and how cultural heritage is directly affected by climate change. Related to that, education and training. There was a demand and ask for training on how to begin thinking and to use some of the tools that were already presented, a lot of digital and analytical tools. And then we ended by discussing a lot about tradition, heritage values, Anthony mentioned it before, and the need to have a cultural shift on how we can use and we can, let's say, allow heritage and our shared experience to inform how we can use cultural heritage as a vehicle for climate action. And we felt that in our region, cultural heritage is a very suitable, like a kind of, yes, agent, that we should be able to use that in a more effective way to at least begin a conversation that for our region in other areas may be more complicated.
Thank you. Yes, based on what Nicolas has just described, which came out, which emerged from our discussion this morning, because we do need to prevent damage and loss of cultural heritage, the threats are immense, from landslides to fires, the problems caused by humidity, earthquakes, the rising sea level. So all the threats are there. I would say that what we need to do right now is to focus on action plans. So that's very, very important. Building on synergies and on the aspects that Nicolas has just highlighted. We need to apply adaptation measures, and we need to know the risks. We need to set priorities by looking at the vulnerability of different sites and monuments, and move on with action plans, because we have been talking a lot in the last few years. We have been assessing a lot. We have been looking at what's there concerning cultural heritage and how the degree to which it is recognized or not. We have done that. We need to act. We need to act now, given the abrupt changes on climate. So, yes.
Thank you, and indeed that's a very powerful message, which brings us nicely to the close of our discussion, hopefully in time for the next one. Please let's give a warm round of applause to our experts who have really made this conversation so interesting. Thank you so much for spending all this time.
Many thanks to Ms. Pilidis and all of our panelists. And before we proceed to the second session, I would like to give a brief introduction of our next chair, Dr. Erato Kozakou-Markoulis. Dr. Kozakou-Markoulis is a prominent diplomat and public servant with an impressive career dedicated to international relations and public policy. She has served Cyprus with distinction as both Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of Communication and Works, as well as through various ambassadorial roles, contributing significantly to the country's foreign relations and infrastructure development. Dr. Kozakou-Markoulis is also a member of the Board of Directors of the Cyprus Institute and Trustee Emeritus of the Cyprus Research and Educational Foundation. With her vast experience in foreign policy, particularly in European and Mediterranean affairs, Dr. Kozakou-Markoulis has been a passionate advocate for peace, cooperation, and human rights on the global stage. She holds degrees in law and public law and political science from the University of Athens, as well as a PhD of social sciences from the University of Helsinki. We're truly privileged to have her here with us. Please welcome Dr. Erato Kozakou-Markoulis to the stage to start the next session.
President of the Cyprus Institute, President Emeritus, Professor Papanikolas, dear panelists and participants of the workshops. It is a distinct honor for me to chair this very important panel tonight, which brings together top scientists dealing with the EMME climate crisis, and particularly the need for cooperation by bringing down all kinds of barriers to combat climate change. a region that faces some of the most acute challenges and risks, and we can see it in our neighborhood taking place right now. The three pre-conference workshops that will be presented by our distinguished panelists, and I would like to ask the three panelists to come to the floor here, and then I will make the introductions. I was just informed that Dr. Elise Machelin is not here tonight. Of course, she was in the workshop, but she's not able to be here tonight. So Dr. Tarek Abu Hamed will be the one to inform us about the workshop, the first workshop. And I would also like to invite Professor Manfred Lange to come to the podium here, and Professor Fadi Komer also to join us. The first workshop, entitled Climate Change Diplomacy to Combat Inequality, was to be presented, and I want to say a few words about Dr. Elise Machelin, who is not able to be with us. But Dr. Elise Machelin, currently Director of the Center for Climate Change Policy and Research of the Arava Institute for Environmental Studies. Dr. Machelin holds a master's degree in desert studies from Ben Gurion University and a PhD in environmental studies and geography at the Sorbonne University. Dr. Machelin joined the Luxembourg Institute of Socio-Economic Research in 2019, and she contributed to a national project on social housing policies and joined the Habitat Observation of the Luxembourg Ministry of Housing. Regarding the workshop, which is the inaugural conference of the new Center for Climate Change Policy and Research of the Arava Institute, most of the participants are regional, Middle East and North Africa climate scientists, stakeholders, NGO leaders, and others to discuss climate inequalities, cross-border cooperation, and establish advanced research collaborations on water, energy, food, sustainable urbanism, and public health. The second workshop, entitled The Environmental Change Migration Conflict Nexus in the Mediterranean, is to be presented by Professor Manfred Lange, professor at the Cyprus Institute and a member of the Scientific Steering Committee of the Mediterranean Experts on Climate Change and Environmental Change, the MED-ECC. Professor Lange was former director of the Arctic Center in Rovaniemi, Finland, professor of geophysics and director of the Center for Environmental Research at the University of Münster, Germany, and founding director of the Energy, Environment and Water Research Center at the Cyprus Institute. His main research interests include the assessment of climate change impacts with a focus on water and energy security, renewable energy sources and energy, and water use efficiency in the built environment in the MENA region. Professor Lange holds a PhD and a habilitation degree in geophysics from the University of Kiel. The workshop reviewed the main results of the MED-ECC special report on environmental change, migration, and conflicts in the Mediterranean. The participants also explored lessons learned and the way forward with regard to research and political actions to address the environmental change, migration, and conflict nexus in order to minimize the adverse effects of the migration crisis in the Mediterranean region through joint efforts in environmental diplomacy and effective cooperation. And the last workshop, entitled the WEFE for Med Prima Community of Practice, Integrating Water, Energy, Food, and Ecosystems for a Sustainable Mediterranean, is going to be presented by Professor Fatih George Komer, who is currently professor of the Cyprus Institute and director of the EEWRC from 2021-2023. Professor Komer is the chair of ECOMED Academy at UNESCO IHP and chaired the Intergovernmental Hydrological Program from 2019 to 2023. He is the president of Medurable in France and member of the Académie des Sciences d'Outre-mer. Professor Komer holds a PhD in hydraulics from the Université Claude Bernard, Lyon. The workshop has gathered scientists, practitioners, policymakers, investors, local authorities, the media, and other stakeholders in a Mediterranean WEFE Nexus community of practice to provide convincing practical and scientific evidence of the Nexus benefits as a basis for decision-making in integrating natural resources management. I will give the floor to all the panelists one by one, and then in the remaining time I will give the floor also to participants for any questions, because I think it's very important to have a vivid discussion on these very, very important issues. First, I will give the floor to Dr. Tarek Abu Hamed, replacing Ms. Machelin, to present us the first workshop.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Dr. Elise Macklin is not with us tonight, and she asked me to replace her. I would like, first of all, to thank the Cyprus Institute, Professor Kostas, Professor Theodoris, that always give us the space here and provide safe space for scientists from the Middle East come convene at the Cyprus Institute, and this is highly appreciated. The Arava Institute is an academic and research institution that advances cross-border environmental cooperation in the face of the political conflict. We do not want to allow the conflict from preventing us, the scientists of the region, not to cooperate to solve the region's environmental problems. The region is facing the threat of climate, but not only. We also share the natural resources of the region. Every single drop of water between Israel, Palestine, and Jordan is shared. We share the surface water, and we share also the aquifer. And that is the importance of bringing scientists to work with each other to cope with the impact of climate change and solve the region's environmental challenges. And at the Arava Institute, we do that through research and also through an academic program. In our workshop, we had 20 participants from Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Morocco, that came and presented their work. And the goal of this workshop, which is actually part of a series of workshops, is to create regional groups, regional working groups of scientists from the whole region. The topics that were discussed in the workshop touched upon environmental epidemiology, to study the impact of climate change, the impact of heat waves on pregnancy in women, and also the impact of particulate matter on the public health in Israel. The second field that we discussed was on in water, the water use and reuse in the water that faces severe challenges on the water scarcity. And we discussed also some kind of technologies to reuse the water. And the third field was on sustainable urbanism, the impact of heat islands, the trees on reducing the heat islands in cities. And the goal is to create a set of data that can help policy makers to take their decisions. And the fourth topic was on renewable energy and energy poverty, to identify and quantify energy poverty in Israel, Jordan, Palestine. Also to collect the data around energy poverty and provide policy makers with the scientific data that they need to design policies. And also we discussed in this group the role of renewable energies in alleviating energy poverty in the region. The use of decentralized technologies, for example, solar energy for water pumping, solar energy for desalination, solar energy for electricity production for farmers to keep them in their farms. And also we had a presentation on the social political aspects in the region, in the rural areas around the region, how politics impact environment, how environment impacts politics. And also we touched upon, that's something that we cannot ignore, which is what's happening right now in Gaza, and how we as non-governmental organizations, as scientists, can provide people in Gaza with decentralized technologies. You know, we all know that rebuilding Gaza will take years, but people will need water. People will need systems to treat the wastewater. People will need electricity, and these kind of decentralized technologies can provide them with the basic needs. So we discussed also that, and we had at the closing session a wonderful presentation from Professor Hans Brunix about climate justice in times of climate change acceleration. To bring such a group of scientists from Israel, Palestine, and Jordan, and also Morocco during this very difficult time is a message that we scientists will not allow the voice of weapons to be higher than the voice of science, and we want to use environment and science as a diplomacy tool to build understanding, to build bridges. And understanding does not mean that we agree. We totally disagree with each other, but we have to build that type of understanding, to build the trust, to build long-lasting, sustainable partnerships in the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abu Hamed. And let me congratulate the Arava Institute for this excellent work. I wish you the best. This is what is needed, especially in that very critical region of the Middle East. And I wish you the best and every success in what you're doing.
Thank you.
We have now the presentation of the workshop entitled The Environmental Change, Migration, Conflict Nexus in the Mediterranean. And I will ask Professor Manfred Lange to present the workshop.
Thank you very much, and colleagues and distinguished guests. It gives me great pleasure to speak to you tonight on a, as I think, very interesting and challenging workshop. You heard a couple of times now the subject was the environmental change, migration, conflict nexus in the Mediterranean, which maybe sounds strange to you on first sight, but when you start thinking about it, it becomes clear why this is an important topic. Let me provide just a little bit of background why this is important. Now, the Mediterranean we've long known is a climate change hotspot. However, it's also a migration hotspot for various reasons, and I don't have time to go into that. But you know that the numbers in 2015, 2016 really peaked, then declined somewhat, but they're on the growth, on the up again in the Mediterranean and in the neighboring countries. Now the result of that is, very basically speaking, tremendous suffering, loss of life, and I think it's hard to really grasp that, but I think what it calls for is that these issues deserve urgent attention, both by scholars and political decision makers. Now, how are we going to go about dealing with this issue? It was mentioned already that there has been a study, it is actually an ongoing study under the auspices of the Mediterranean experts on climate and environmental change, in short, MEDEC. This is an organization of volunteers. They are independent. They work in various fields. And the initiative, or the group, was founded in the wake of the Paris COP in 2015. Now, since that time, we worked extensively on a major report on the environment and climate changes in the Mediterranean, which was published as a book of some 600 pages in 2021. Now, MEDEC is organized by, or is run by, a coordination team and then by a scientific steering committee. Now, after MAR 1, as it was called, was done, the question was, what next? And one of the answers was, let's try to come up with a series or a number of special reports. One of these reports turned out to be the environmental change, migration, conflict nexus in the Mediterranean. And Rula Madjani and myself were and are the coordinators of this volume. Now, as was said earlier, the purpose and the major goal of the workshop was, on the one hand, to look at what we have achieved so far. In other words, what are the current understandings on climate change, environmental change, migration, and conflicts in the Mediterranean. And I don't have to tell you, when you start looking at that, that becomes really complicated and intertwined. Furthermore, the second major goal of the workshop was really to identify and explore any gaps, maybe also some overlaps, and identify research needs and a way forward to come up with maybe recommendations in the policy field. And I'll come back to that in a moment. The workshop was relatively small. We had 13 speakers and 16 participants. However, we took advantage of the small size in engaging really in very lively and very productive discussions. Now, I didn't know how much time. I mean, I was told I have 5 minutes, but I heard more than 5 minutes by others, so I'm still going to be brief. What are the key findings that the report, but also the workshop, identified? Well, very simply speaking, the major cause of migration, why people start to move, really is a deterioration of the living conditions at the places where they live. And often these deteriorations come at a scale that leaves no choice. People have to leave, and they do. What one should mention here at this point very clearly is that migration happens on two scales. One is called internal migration, that's between or in between a country, and the other one is international or cross-border migration. The former is by far the most important one as far as numbers are concerned. Now, looking at the main drivers of migration, and it's, as I said earlier, the environmental change, it is migration and its conflicts. We came up and adopted a concept called the environmental change migration conflict nexus. Because it was clear that any single dealing with one of these drivers will not get us where we want to be. Migration, again, very basically speaking, is very, very seldom a monocausal event. There are always several causes that people that lead people to start packing and move. Now, if you look at these drivers, no wonder it turns out the relationships are highly complex. They are nonlinear. They are very difficult to model, even though there are attempts to do that. Bottom line in that regard is really that we're still waiting to come up with quantifiable, concrete relationships between these drivers. Obviously, there are relationships between, for instance, climate change and migration. We talk about climate refugees, although, I mean, that's a sideline. That is also somewhat misleading, but anyways. But again, if you look at the triplet of drivers, it becomes much more complicated. And again, we cannot overlook that. We cannot say, oh, in this case, it's just climate. I think in many, not in all, but in many cases, it's really these three drivers, particularly if you look at the region that we are considering here, primarily the Eastern Mediterranean, but not only the Eastern Mediterranean. Now, having discussed this at length, we were thinking what could be an outcome of the workshop, and where would we like to go? And we thought of a couple of policy implications / open parenthesis, recommendations, close parenthesis. Because recommendations to politicians are always difficult and dangerous. Anyways, looking at, again, the nexus, it is clear that there are tremendous gaps in our knowledge and in data describing these processes. There's also, if you look at the scientific community, a lacking consensus on how to really quantify and describe, at least qualitatively, the relationships that I'm talking about. On the other hand, and that's a completely different sort of angle, if you wish, we identified this problem as a prime example for a very suitable subject of an effective and comprehensive science policy interface. And MEDAC has indeed, as one of its major goals, to play a role between science and politics, at least on the Mediterranean scale, focusing on the problems for very good reasons, and Cyprus is one example, but I'm not going to go into that. It's clear that there is so far not sufficient interaction and cooperation. Well, we talked about cooperation before, and that's sort of just another iteration of that, but it really is important if you want to get a handle on this issue. I think we need to come up with active, concrete, and suitable and effective environmental diplomacy measures to deal with that and to address these challenges. Let me close by sort of making a plea to this audience and to the Cyprus Climate Change Initiative. Of course, as you know, there was a task force in the beginning of the CCI on migration, which produced a very interesting and I think very substantial report, even though it dealt only, quote unquote, with climate change and migration. But I would say, unfortunately, that's where we stand. There have been a number of concrete recommendations in this report, which still wait to be realized. So again, I would like to encourage you, those of you who have the means to do so, to address these challenges and to thereby hopefully reduce, if not minimize, the human sufferings in connection with environmental change, migration, and conflicts. Thank you very much.
This issue of migration is already creating great, has a great impact on societies because of other causes so far, but climate change, of course, is going to be definitely in the near future if we are not going to tackle the climate change. It is going to affect much more, I think, our societies in the Middle East and North Africa. Now I would like to ask Professor Comer to introduce the third workshop entitled The WEFE for Med Prima Community of Practice, Integrating Water, Energy, Food, and Ecosystems from a Sustainable Mediterranean.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It's an honor to be with you in this panel to convey the recommendation of our Nexus Community of Practice, WEFE FORMED project under PRIMA and EU. It happens that 20 years ago, we had the same experience when we started implementing integrated water resource management through an IWRM community of practice. And in the year 2000, the first meeting was held in Athens. It was presided by Professor Skoulos, Michael Skoulos, and myself, so that for the northern shore, Greece will be the leading country, and the southeastern shore, Lebanon, will be the leading country. So it took us mainly about 8 years, and we have prominent experts in this conference room, Her Excellency Sharafat Afilal, Her Excellency Maysoon Zobi. We were together in order to implement this concept of IWRM, and it took us about 8 years really to start with that, only for water. So our project, Nexus Community of Practice for WEFE, Water, Energy, Food, and Ecosystem, I think that there is a lot of challenges that we need to overcome, but since we have the full support of PRIMA, we have the unwavering support and advice of the administration of PRIMA, and the technical also services of PRIMA. We have the support of EU GRC, of EU Innovation and Research, of UFM. We have also in our project a consortium, whereas each partner is a leader in his domain. We have leaders in water, we have leaders in energy, we have leaders in food and in governance. So this is why we think that in a couple of years we can give complete success to this project. And today we have the official launching of the WEFE format. And yesterday we had the consortium meeting also to start building the sustainability of the Nexus Community of Practice. It is not a scientific project. It is a multi-phased project, bridging science, research, innovation, science to policy, to investment, to capacity building. And then we need to seek its sustainability after the end of the project. So this was the discussion that we had today, and I'm honored to convey today some of the recommendation of the outcome of this long discussion based on two major keynote speak. First one is Professor Ricaboni, who is the chair of Prima EU, and thanks to Professor Papanikolas for helping us also to have Professor Ricaboni with us today. And the other keynote speaker is our president, Professor Malas, who gave us the closing remark for our workshop. So, as I told you, the main idea is to bridge the gap. We have gathered the database on a knowledge hub, very important database, knowledge hub. We have also presented all the demonstration of Wi-Fi, starting by Proteus, which is the jewel of the Wi-Fi for the Mediterranean basin. We all know what we do in Proteus, from the polygeneration of energy, concentrated power, to the desalination, and we are seeking also hydroponic. So from this demonstration site, we start collecting other demos in the Mediterranean basin. What is the most important is not to put the demos in the knowledge hub, but it is a lesson learned that we can take out from these demos. So we need to make categories for each kind of demos, and then provide the lesson learned so that we can attract the community of practice, because this community of practice is made from several types of community. There is members who are really interested by the Wi-Fi, and there is also the community which use the Wi-Fi as tools for agriculture, as tools for energy, as tools for food, and this is what we need to do, to start the interaction between the community of practice so that we can consolidate the policies. So bridging the gap between research, science, and policy is very important. We have policy for water, we have policy for energy, we have policy for food, but still until now, we don't have a policy for Wi-Fi. It's very easy to make this in the northern country, European country, because the Minister of Environment is the one who made those policy for the Wi-Fi. Whereas in the southeastern countries, and I was managing a very important ministry in Lebanon linked to my activities in France, the Ministry of Water and Energy is responsible of those sectors. The Ministry of Environment is a poor ministry in the Middle Eastern country. They do mainly nothing, only recommendation. And we have the Ministry of really Energy, which is a very powerful ministry. So we need to talk the same language between these scattered situations. So how can we attract the policymaker? How can we attract these public figures in the creation of this network, robust network? So this is a big task in the interaction in our knowledge hub that we need to implement. Another idea that you have talked about, Tariq, today, surely in your panel, because I followed a little bit your panel online, is hydrodiplomacy. And hydrodiplomacy is the concept that we launched 20 years ago. Now we cannot encounter any solution on transboundary water basin without the nexus. So all the solution, whereas it is in the Tigris and the Euphrates, or on the Blue Nile with the Gerd Dam, all the countries, Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, needs to implement a nexus solution, because Egypt needs the food security, it needs the water, Ethiopia needs the water and it needs the energy, and Sudan needs the three of them. So it's very important. So this is the first recommendation, science policy interface gap. The second recommendation is the institutional framework gap. Institutional framework gap, we need to know how we are going to work together and as a policy makers for the energy, water, food, and environment. So we need to create ad hoc group. We need to change the strategy. So in each entity, we'll have a focal point that can interact with the other focal point, and we start enhancing the discussion about the Wi-Fi in order to motivate the community of practice. The third recommendation is capacity building. Without the capacity building, we will not be able to consolidate this nexus community of practice. Capacity building at all levels, at the level of the members that are interested with Wi-Fi, and at the top level also. We need to educate policymakers, we need to educate also the managers, and we need to educate the farmer. We need to go down from top to down in order to let the farmer use those innovation techniques. And the last recommendation is the investment gap. How can we work by neglecting the private sector? How can we attract the private sector? It's a major issue that we need to implement and to keep the sustainability of the project, because what we are aiming at the Cyprus Institute is to continue the momentum of this nexus community of practice, not to stop when the project will stop. And this is what PRIMA seeks also, and this is why we presented a charter today, and we're very happy that our president was the first personality who signed this Wi-Fi charter for the Middle Eastern country. So thank you so much, and we hope that we can have overcome the challenges, and we will have a success when the project will be closed in 2 years, and the momentum will continue after the closing of the project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Comer, for this very informative briefing, but also for the very important recommendations that came out of the workshop, which are really all 4 of them. They are very, very critical, and of course they need to be followed up by the Institute and by other policymakers and researchers. I could ask a lot of questions, but I think we have here around this room very distinguished participants who participated in the workshops, but also other scientists who will be participating in the climate change conference starting tomorrow. So I would like to open the floor. We have only about 20 minutes for any questions to the panelists. But I would like to ask the help of someone with a microphone. Could you please raise your hands and identify also yourselves and ask the specific questions to specific panelists? The gentleman there.
Good afternoon. My name is Ali Roma. I am project officer, a professor at PRIMA Foundation in the Mediterranean. So we have seen here this afternoon 2 nexus. We have the climate change, migration and the conflict, and we have another nexus, water, energy, food ecosystem nexus. So I believe that now we can find one nexus could maybe try to contribute to solve the other nexus. The water, energy, food ecosystem nexus, you know, because it's like it started in 2011 by since the Bonn conference, and now the major impact of the water, energy, food ecosystem nexus, if we will implement it in the Mediterranean, this will facilitate the adaptation and mitigation to climate change. So if we'll implement the solution, and now the Professor Fedi highlighted this community of practice for the first time, we are pushing to implement the community of practice in the Mediterranean. So the idea behind that is that to implement the solution, to replicate, to upscale, and to attract the investors So the idea could be, it could solve, I don't think that we solve the migration and displacement, but could contribute to reduce the migration, to also contribute to the adaptation of the climate change, mitigation as well. So I think we have two nexus, and one of them could, serve and potentially find solution to the other nexus, which is basically we know that the climate change and the migration, there is no basically like a correlation directly between migration and climate change, because there's other drives very well. And even if you see what has been published so far, there is no like evidence and the data that could confirm that basically this is very linked to the climate change, since we have a lot of other factors involved in the migration. So it's a comment, it's not like a question, but thank you so much for this panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Lange and Professor Kommer probably would like to, yes, please.
Thanks very much for this question. I hope I understood you correctly. I mean, what you're saying is that climate change or environmental change as a root cause or as a primary cause is, well, not really sufficient to explain. And I fully agree with you. I said very clearly, migration and the decision to migrate is always a multi-causal, or not always, but in most cases, a multi-causal decision. And social, political, economic, all these things play a role in making people to leave. Again, I think it comes down to what I said in the beginning. I mean, if the living conditions for people in a given region are unbearable because they don't have work, there is no sufficient water supply, there is no energy supply, you name it, that is a major driver of migration. Clearly, I would not want to rank, what is more important or less important. What I'm saying is that, the issue of environmental change, which itself, of course, is highly complex, because we include in environmental change the concept of climate change, we include environmental degradation, we include overexploitation, you name it. So again, the point here is really that in order to understand and in order to also address these issues, we need to look at a spectrum of things. And if I may, I don't know if I understood correctly, but I mean, I think you mentioned adaptation. I didn't really go into that, but obviously adaptation on the one hand can be understood, or the other way around. Migration can be understood as an adaptive measure. However, we feel that what would be needed in terms of political measures, we should really aim to provide adaptive measures and transformative adaptation to people at the place as much as possible to change the dreadful conditions and to prevent them to start moving. I think I'll leave with that.
If you allow me, Your Excellency, to place some thoughts and lessons learned on the impact of migration on water and also on energy. This is a very important subject. 2014, we have hosted in Lebanon 1,500,000 Syrian. And as you know, I was running the Ministry of Energy and Water, and I started building models to see how much this number will impact the water balance in Lebanon. And I was treated by all the adjectives when I did adjectif, we say this in French, when I presented those models. And the impact was that in the year 2000, the water balance of Lebanon, which is a very rich country in water, will be negative. And it happens that the transboundary allocated water of the Orontes, that it was allocated to the Syrian, they were using it in Lebanon. So now the balance is completely in an equilibrium, and there is about 20% of negative impact on the water balance. So the impact is so high. And this is why we need to think about a nexus community of practice, because now the energy became very, very expensive. And when the energy became expensive, this is when we start to think about using new technology in water management, using new technology in energy management. But how can we apply this to food? We need also to innovate in food. We need to produce more in order to fulfill the food security of the population. So this, what we are seeking in the Nexus community of practice, is to consolidate sustainability for our well-being and for our existence. Otherwise, we will face a lot of problems with the impact of climate change. And as Professor Papanikolas in one of his conferences, he says that the first sector that will break is the agriculture sector in our region. And we need to continue by building this awareness about the Nexus community of practice. Thank you.
Professor Lange, this is a very, very
just a brief response, Fadi, because I think you touched on a very important point, which I didn't have time to touch on, namely the host countries. And what's happening in the host countries when, as you said, in Lebanon or in Jordan, a large number of people flow in, and the reaction ranges from complete rejection over I can't think of the word, of reservations to perhaps careful acceptance. But I think we should always keep in mind that this in itself also has the potential to cause new conflicts, both within the refugee community in the host country and, maybe more importantly, between the host country communities or society and the refugees. And again, that's something that we should not lose sight of.
Any other questions, please?
Ms. Ratov, many thanks for your colleagues. My name is Kirill Popov. I represent a company, Growth Point, from actually Limassol, but generally speaking, we are working with Cyprus Institute with colleagues here, and we were in the workshop about the energy storage today, earlier. And actually, it's very interesting coincidence, and it's not only coincidence, as we are thinking over the energy, and not only energy with regards to this conference, because it's like a much more complex issue. For example, I think colleagues know, because it's also, I understand colleagues mainly from Cyprus Institute, that, for example, the Agricultural Ministry has issued the warning that for 2 years, there will be very limited issuance of new wells or water wells in Cyprus because of drought, or the problem with the water is becoming severe in Cyprus. So they will not provide any more allowance to make new deep wells for water. It's also the problem which contributes, for example, if you know, a lot of dams are now semi-drought, so they don't have water inside. Actually, for example, in the big dam near Limassol, the 2 of them are having half amount of water than before. So that's why it's much more complex issue than just energy or climate. So my question is that, have you analyzed is there any interconnected model which can model different things, like, for example, agriculture plus energy, so how they influence between each other is why that's the first question, actually. And second question, our company is also proud to support University of Cyprus. If you know, about 10 years ago, they started the project Mavros Chrysos about the reestablishment of carp production in Cyprus with a big plantation. They started in actually, it's between Limassol and Paphos, 6,000 trees of local species of carp. And actually, this project we support also now importing new species from Spain, which is more productive. Why it's important? Because actually carob is unique tree which actually is growing without water being injected actually after 30 years. So it forces, and after it grows without water completely, which is eventually can help us because it's, first of all, it grows without water completely. So actually letting other species to work, to grow. And another is because it's very, it's not just about taste, but also very, it has a lot of sugar content. So my question is that potentially, have you analyzed this interconnection between energy we need for desalination, but also we may change impact for certain species, for certain crops that we grow in Cyprus, in terms of abating the climate change. So how this can be interconnected? So have you done this kind of work to analyze this?
Who would like to answer this question? Yes.
Actually, one of the projects that we are developing at the Arava Institute, which is located in the southern part of Israel, in the hyper-arid region, is what we call the agri-photovoltaic. It's the dual use of land for electricity production using PV panels and also agriculture below the PV panels, studying the impact of shading on agricultural activities, water conservation, and also the impact of agriculture on the performance of photovoltaic panels, because you create a kind of microclimate, you change the temperature, and you reduce the dust. The benefits of such project is not only that you produce electricity and produce food, you give another type of income for the farmers, where they suffer in our region. And it's a perfect solution for countries with a limited amount of land. The electricity that is generated, in our case, you can sell it to the grid. That generates another income. In rural areas around the world, in the developing world, this electricity can be used to desalinate water. That means you have high quality water, you can diversify your crops, or can be used for cooling, where farmers in rural areas can store their products for longer periods. And for the second section of your question about that type of a tree, I don't have any information about that, but we have at the Arava Institute the Center for Sustainable Agriculture, where the director of that center is sitting here, and they do a lot of work on plantations that can handle the stress of scarcity of water and the water with very high salinity. So I encourage you to connect with Oren. Oren, can you raise your hand?
I think we have time for one more question. Please, the lady.
Yes, thank you. This is for Dr. Fadi and about the Wi-Fi. You know, in Jordan, we speak a lot about Wi-Fi, and last year we were very happy to establish a council among ministries, and then this council became like a unit at the Ministry of Planning. So from your own experience, what type or the best type of governance or institutional mechanism that the thinking at Wi-Fi should become across the sectors? Let's say the Minister of Agriculture, when he think about improving agriculture, he will put in his mind the shortage of water. Will he write his strategy? Same like with water and energy, to think how much the energy cost water sector. So the government, how they reach this type of thinking. Now they're happy to show that, okay, we have a Samra, and the Samra, it's Wi-Fi, good model and example. They thought, for them to say, they have a Wi-Fi project. But the thinking at the level of policy and strategy, what can we do, or if you heard about any experience that to transfer this thinking at the government level and not even to agree any strategy that can cause, let's say, especially with energy, the waste of water and high need of water. Thank you.
Thank you so much, dear Maysoon. I know that you have the whole knowledge to to start tackling this problem. To my understanding, first of all, we need, and this is a recommendation that I presented to UNESCO, to change the curriculum of engineering. We need first not to work in a cluster. We have an agriculture engineer, we have a water engineer, we have an energy engineer, and an environmental engineer. So I told UNESCO, why don't we start building a curriculum so that we start having this type of engineer which deal from the soil till the environment and making all this circle together. So after 5 years, not to have in the American system 4 years engineering, in the French system 5 years, we have a multi-experienced and foreign engineer. Number two, we need to start implementing technology, even if it costs a lot of money. But in order to implement technology, drip irrigation, hydroponic, seeking for the leakage, smart management, water management, we need to shake hands with the private sector. Governments are corrupt. Governments does not have, I have experienced this, and this is why I am in Cyprus and in France, because governments are corrupt, and we need to shake hands with the private sector, and this is why the private sector can give much more motivation in order to expand, let the farmer expand his irrigation schemes and get much more income for him. And number three, as we have said, capacity building. We have to follow the trend to train all the levels of the society. Thank you.
I would like to thank, first of all, our three very distinguished panelists, Professor Lange, Professor Comer, and Dr. Abu Hamed, for these very, very important presentations. But also, I would like to thank all the participants of the workshop and for the recommendations that they have brought to us. I wish them every luck in all the follow-up research and policies that they're going to continue, especially with the Arava Institute. I would like to again congratulate them, especially at this very, very critical moment. And I wish that this cooperation will continue despite the many obstacles, because it is so important for the people of the region. Thank you very much, and please let us give a very warm round of applause to panelists and to the participants.
So, on behalf of the Cyprus Institute and the Academy, we'd like to thank all the panelists, our esteemed chairs, and would like to invite you to our welcome reception next door at the Waves Beach Bar, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow as well for the conference. Thank you.